Boom. Good morning, Stuart.
Good morning, Nick. Nice to be here.
Yeah, I just made myself a nice Nespresso latte, and I'm all set to have a super cool conversation with you this morning.
Looking forward to it.
The trigger for the conversation is actually an event that we will co-host together with HP. At a super cool location, by the way, Living Tomorrow. It's an innovation campus where we will get a tour also on the exhibition of the world of 2030. So it's going to be super cool, I think. And then we will have a session with you, which is basically the opening workshop for the Unbossers Why 2024 program, which is a year program. Five companies, super cool companies, are participating, and they will be represented each time by about five employees per company. So we will have a group about 20 to 30 people. And yeah, the opening session is with you on how to measure. And I think that's basically also a very important storyline of the entire program this year, is making the bridge between believing that investments in purpose, in impact, in environment, in sustainability is super important, and then making the bridge to it's not just important from a philosophical perspective, but it is also super important to create value, very concrete value for your business. And that's what the topic of your session is all about, right?
Exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah, we want to make tangible something which is largely intangible, and show how purpose links all the way through to a kind of different kind of value, a different version of success for organizations, and that's where we'll start. Really, is how should we define organizational or business success in a world which is changing rapidly, where there is big responsibilities on organizations to be addressing environmental and human concerns, and so we need to integrate that into what success looks like. So that's where we'll start. We'll talk about what value looks like, but fundamentally starting to build links between activities and initiatives around the subject and making a real difference and measuring that difference so that we can show what progress looks like. Because fundamentally, if we don't measure this stuff in some way, shape or form, we don't manage it, and we don't get the kind of buy-in that we really need from all our stakeholders, from the board, C-suite, to investors, to wider society.
Yeah, and it's exactly that last driver that makes me really energized about your participation in the program, because last year we saw that we attracted business people that believe almost intuitively that investments in making your company purpose-driven, social impact, that eventually results in positive business outcomes. But within their own organizations, they get questions from people for whom it's less obvious, like, yeah, but what is now the business case for this? And so that's why I'm super energized that you're part of the program. But maybe first let's zoom in on Stuart. Who is Stuart? And I thought um, a good way to paint a picture, let's say, is could you share with us what is your biggest success and biggest regret of last year? So let's
Oh,
start with the biggest success.
well, biggest success, I guess, is We've got a big initiative off the ground. So we are working with the legal sector, so law firms, general counsels in corporates, major corporates, and we're helping them to get to grips with ESG, how responsible business, and how to integrate that into being a successful law firm. So we're deploying our own diagnostics and creating, and we have created what we've called a law firm maturity index. So that's been really, that's probably the most exciting concrete thing that we've done.
What does that mean? A law firm maturity index?
So in very simple terms, what we do at the Maturity Institute is to understand the health of an organization in human terms. Okay, so and in order to do that, we need to essentially assess and measure that health, just like we would do our own health as human beings. And so maturity is a measure of human health, measuring the extent to which an organization is purpose-driven, but has built the management systems and the kind of culture which is going to drive those positive, impactful outcomes that we've just kind of referred to. So the maturity index is a measure of that health. And so it's a bit like, you know, many organizations put a lot of effort into telling the world how responsible they are, how good they are around their own people and the various stakeholders. But there are no real standards that can give you any independent, objective verification of what that looks like. So what, you know, how healthy are you? Well, what evidence do you have? And generally you have an array of different things which organizations put forward. And what we want to do, and what we originally did at the Maturity Institute, was to establish something which could sit alongside a financial rating. So we have what we call a maturity rating. And so we can see the organization's health in financial terms when we look at credit ratings or other financial ratings and analysis. But we want to look at it in human terms. So how healthy is this organization in human terms? Because when we look at the two, we might see that there's a big gap between the two. They might see that they're very well aligned, but overall, we can see a much richer picture of whether the organization is fundamentally healthy and really in a sustainable place. So that's what we're doing in the legal world. We are about to launch a similar project in the investment space. So these are really exciting initiatives. So that's the positive.
How does it apply for the investment space?
Similarly with investors, so investment firms are under a lot of pressure in the sense that they are being asked by people, you know, individual investors like us, to say we want to invest responsibly. And so they've got to change the way they do business by showing that the companies they're invested in are either aligned with ESG or sustainability or impact. And obviously that means that the investment firm themselves gets put under greater scrutiny, because if you're saying that you are a responsible, or you can invest responsibly or according to ESG principles or metrics or whatever, then the focus then becomes on you as an organization. Are you really walking the talk, or are you just telling us stuff that we want to hear?
So purely shareholder value and return on investment won't cut it anymore. You need additional types of value creation next to that to motivate investors to join your company. That's a trend that you're seeing.
Very much so. I think that this comes back to what we started with. I think success and value have changed already, and I think they will continue to change. And that's away from conventional shareholder value, which is about focusing on short-term financial profits or earnings, to one which integrates a more total or holistic form of value and impact that an organization has on all its stakeholders. Hence, you know, we need to move from a world of pure financial shareholder value to one where we're measuring true stakeholder value, which integrates both financial, human, and environmental impact. And our world is one where we know we've got the evidence to show there are organizations that are already doing this, but we need to show how more organizations can do more of that kind of thing, and transition to a world in which success is about this, making a positive impact for all stakeholders.
One last quick question before I move to your regrets of 2023. What's your perspective on ESG? I don't follow it very much. I'm definitely not an expert, and
Yeah.
I hear mixed things about it. You know, I hear it sets positive things in motion. At the same time, I hear it's air castles in the air. No, how do you say that in English? There's an expression for building castles in the air. Like it's a lot of blah blah, a lot of marketing, but behind it in concrete things, there's not really a lot happening. So just curious, what's your view on that?
It's really interesting. I mean, we could spend a long time talking about it. I mean, fundamentally, ESG means different things to different people. So where we've seen a backlash is particularly in North America or the US, where the idea of ESG is equated with liberal politics, and organizations have some responsibility in this, in the sense that they have, some organizations have jumped on bandwagons, which jumped on initiatives or activities which have clearly a political dimension, and so they've allowed themselves to be attacked, and ESG has become embroiled within that focus. So in political circles, ESG has been tried. They've tried to turn ESG into a woke liberal, idea which we should avoid at all costs. So, the latest, if you see diversity and inclusion, that's a woke agenda. It's wrong. It's, putting ethnic minorities in a place which is putting them first for, women.
It's very politicized in the
very
US.
politicized. If you step back from that, the reality of ESG in its essence is that it's really about integrating what we've just talked about, the impact of an organization in environmental and human terms, and the potential harms that organizations do in that respect, or the actual harms that they do, the risks that arise from that, but also then the ways that organizations could actually become more positive. So in a climate context, how do you reduce your carbon footprint and head towards net zero and even become net positive? So that's the kind of transition, if you like. So ESG is really about responsible business, becoming more responsible to the environmental and human stakeholders that you have. That's not going away. That's getting bigger, and we know that because particularly in the EU and beyond, governments are legislating to make that a bigger issue. Investors are including it in their criteria in emerging markets. So it's not going away. It is getting much bigger and bigger. So in that respect, if we kind of strip away the letters, get down to the core of what this is really about, which is coming back to where we started, which is how can we become more responsible, still be successful financially, and measure that impact. And ESG is kind of caught amongst the seas. I personally think that the word, that those letters will still be retained, but they might disappear. That you might see the use of the word sustainability more, or the use of the word impact more, or the use of the word responsibility more, because they don't want to politicize the activities which have that's happened. That makes some sense.
Yeah, I have a personal preference for responsibility, and the fact that you guys are coming out of the legal bit, doing this in the legal environment, which might be a misconception, but I didn't have the perception that that was the most purpose-driven business in the world, and also in the investment world. That really makes your experience and your approach super powerful, because you don't give away the excuse, yeah, but this is in the social sector, or these are tech startups. doing these fancy, responsible things. No, you're really in the, let's say, the legacy businesses, which are typically linked with blind focus on profit. So that makes your, in my personal opinion, your story, your approach, and your experience super interesting.
Yeah, and we deliberately did that right from the start because our view was if we could not root ourselves in core business and investment models and show that it was fundamental to the success of those models and the business strategy, then we would always be peripheral. And which is what's happened with things like corporate social responsibility and even ESG today is, it's still, because it's still regarded by many as a peripheral activity or something where you do a lot of PR and you talk a good game, but you still do business as usual. And you're right. I mean, the legal world is a really fascinating place. It's facing the same crisis as everyone, really, which is, we've got to shift. We've got a legal world which is really about driving productivity or billable hours, trying to get the most out of people to do client-facing work and generate fees and growing those fees and making the best possible profit per partner in a law firm, to one where we suddenly, as a law firm, we've got to think about the clients that we're serving. Are they causing damage to the world around us? Our own impact as a law firm, particularly on our own people. Are they mentally healthy? Are we inclusive? So all these, really difficult human and environmental issues are very much front and center in law firms. And they've got a particular problem because or challenge, shall we say, because they're growing big businesses around ESG law and regulations or environmental and human rights laws, for example, which they are helping firms to navigate themselves. So law firms are very much under the spotlight.
Okay. Let's segue to the regret. What's the biggest regret of 2023?
I don't have any regrets, Nick. I can't. What was my biggest regret in the last 12 months? Gosh, I don't know. Yeah, I actually don't. Yeah, I had actually. I tend not to have. I tend not. I mean, yeah. You always question yourself and say, would I live my life differently if I did it again? I worked with an academic at King's College who studies career regret, so it's kind of interesting. But to me, I would have, I don't really have any regrets over the last 12 months. I would have liked to have discovered a more purpose-driven focus for my work life earlier, and that's my challenge, is to try and get my children to find their own meaning and purpose earlier than I did, because I think that leads to a more fulfilling, but what that looks like, so my challenge is constantly to try and be more, purposeful and meaningful. I think one of the things I've tried to do is and I think this is a very personal thing, is to try and be kinder, and to try not to get annoyed, particularly with my kids. So, and to try and, live a life where, I can take a breath before reacting to something and try and react in a very positive way. So, so they're things I have to work on, shall we say.
Okay. Great. Maybe so you triggered something when you said you worked with someone, a professor in career regrets.
Yeah.
Is there one learning that you still remember from that person and the topic of career regrets?
It was some time ago, and she's probably done a lot more work in, between that. I think it just taps into this idea that, particularly in the UK, you're forced to confront, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? What do you want to do? You're under this pressure, and you're almost pushed into making choices around, what kind of contribution do you want to make to the world out there? What kind of job do you want? And I think there's a lot of people still who go out into the world of work, and we're just not very good at helping to navigate that and to get people to make the best possible choice they can. And I think when I look back, I and lots of people fell into the career that I didn't really make a particularly active choice around that based on good information and good mentoring and coaching. So I think there's a lot of there's a lot of regret out there, and I think we have a world where we can try and change the world enough where those regrets can go away, so we can work for better organizations. We can work for organizations that better share our values, and ultimately we can lead to much healthier places as a consequence. Again, I think coming back to my personal view is I try not to dwell on regret as a negative thing, and to see it as a learning. Okay, I'm philosophical.
Yeah.
What did I learn? What did I learn from that experience, and how did I
exactly for
um,
people who are interested in that, there's an episode on this Unbolsters podcast with Daniel Pink, quite a famous New York Times bestseller, on his latest book, which is The Power of Regrets, and how regrets can be a super interesting source of information to improve your life. Anyway, let's focus now on your purpose topic, which is the mature organization. So I think we already touched upon it, but maybe one more time, what is a mature organization in your definition?
So first and foremost, it's authentically purpose-driven, and it's purpose-driven in the products and services it produces. So it doesn't have a separate mission. Its products and services are there to make a contribution to society. Whether you make ice cream, beds, you're a bank, you're a sports organization, your purpose is to do that as best you can. And in doing that, you are also trying to minimize any negative impact in environmental and human terms. So ultimately that's kind of a core purpose, which means that it's very commercial and very societal at the same time. So authentically purpose-driven. And then the difficult stuff is you need a coherent set of management systems that can bring that purpose to life. So you design systems across the whole: quality, reward, innovation, learning, performance. All these things are designed to align with the purpose and the values and the strategy. And then alongside those management systems is your culture. You deliberately foster a healthy corporate culture, primarily where people feel empowered. You act with integrity. There's people are treated fairly. All the good things that people generally want from working for any one person or any one organization. So those three things: authentically purpose-driven, coherent systems, and a healthy corporate culture. Get all those right, and you have the chance of becoming a mature organization. And by doing that, you not only differentiate yourself in financial terms, you differentiate yourself in terms of all the impact on your whole ecosystem of stakeholders. And that value, that underlying long-term value, stays with you. Maturity should be quite sticky, and that differentiation can last for a long period of time. So highly mature organizations tend to outperform for all their stakeholders over many years, if not decades.
Okay, now we've established what a mature organization is. Where does your maturity index then come into play? Is that, in simple terms, to measure the level of maturity that your organization has and to identify gaps?
Yes, exactly that. So what we're going to be doing in our workshop is essentially starting that process of how do we measure this nebulous, ambiguous concept called maturity? How do we unpack it in a way that we can make it easily understandable, and then make it extremely practical in terms of the kind of things that will drive higher levels of maturity, the things that we can expect as measurable outcomes, and ultimately, how does that then link through to the value of our organization? The value of our organization, both in financial terms, but also in ESG terms, if you like. Though all those
Super cool.
Yeah, so that's the process we're going to take people through, and that process will start very quickly because we can you know, once we start to unpack it and show people how this thing builds up, the kind of things that you can measure and the outcomes, then you can start to fill in the picture, you know, over time. So maturity can start very quickly, and then you just build it over time, and you refine it, and you kind of and you're away, and you've got your roadmap for moving forward.
So basically, you create a you start creating a painting with all the ingredients that add up to becoming a mature organization. And you link that also with the value that these ingredients are creating for the organization and the different stakeholders. And as you progress, the painting becomes a better and better visualization of the maturity of your organization and all the value that you're creating.
Yeah, exactly that. So, you know, in some ways, you know, the brilliant painters never painted the perfect picture, right? They were always, I can do better. So a mature organization, I can never create a perfectly mature organization. Here's my canvas, I can put down my layers of paint, I can build it up, and I can be pretty happy with where I am, but I'm obsessed with making it better. And I'm constantly, you know, Leonardo da Vinci, scrape it off, let's start again. Let's, you know, so I'm always trying to make a better visualization, and the world around me may change. So I may have to change my picture over time because society is changing or the world is changing. So, you know, I guess there's a really interesting organization called Mercadona. I may have mentioned it to you in the past. It's a Spanish headquartered supermarket. It says it calls itself a project in constant transformation. And you know, it's one of our kind of exemplar organizations. It has fabulous customer service. Its underlying purpose is to make Spain proud of itself as an organization, as a supermarket. And it's fascinating. But if you look at it, it says we're all about learning and transformation and constant improvement. This constant striving to do better, to adapt, change, flex as we move forward. And interestingly, it's one of the few organizations that have a really nice coherent set of KPIs across all its stakeholder groups. So it measures these things, you know, it expects, you know, its own maturity to have those positive outcomes across all its stakeholder groups, and it measures those things and reports on them year on year. So it's a really nice example.
Super cool. How dogmatic are you in your thinking in terms of the evolution that an organization undergoes from purely financially driven towards a mature organization? What's your 2 cents on that?
We're not dogmatic at all. Different organizations have different contexts, completely different circumstances, and for them, their way they embark, the way they move along their journey is all very different. And you know, one of the things that we do as part of the sort of maturity diagnostic, and we'll talk about this in the workshop, is that, you know, some organizations are already very good at various elements of, you know, you could say, well, actually, that's really mature management practice, or that's mature leadership. And so, and that looks really different for different types of organizations. So sometimes you've got to fix the purpose. Sometimes purpose actually might be brilliant, maybe really well articulated and thought out, but you may have to fix reward, or there may be aspects of culture that need fixing, or the way you learn, performance management, innovation. Across the diagnostic, there are lots of different things that the challenge of the diagnostic is to work with every organization, identify the biggest things that need fixing. What can we fix first? Where can we make real progress? Where can we show tangible results of that progress, so that we can get the buying and growth of this idea that ultimately we transform the organization into a mindset that all leaders, managers, and staff have a mature mindset. They approach their work in a mature way. And when you get to that point, you get to a Mercadona type organization, or maybe Handelsbanken in banking. That culturally you feel different to everybody else, because fundamentally you are. But that journey to that place may be different. But it can be done. Again, the time frame may be different. You can make really big progress over a matter of months. It may take 2 or 3 years to make the bulk of the change. It may take 5 years before you consider yourself to be in the where you really want to be. But coming back to this idea, really mature organizations never sit still. That everything's about change, innovation, improvement. It's constant. It's built into our DNA. It's built into our system. It's built into our culture.
I'm thinking, I'm choosing between two follow-up questions. Yeah, I know which one I'm gonna go for. So you've collected quite a data set,
yeah,
on all these organizations. What's your perception of the average state of maturity of the corporate world? So,
it's a really good question. It's a little bit hard from the data set, because some of the data sets, a lot of organizations that want to work with are already progressed down the road. So a lot of the organizations we have data on are already kind of, if you think of a normal distribution, to the right hand side of the midpoint. Generally, I would say that most organizations are slightly to the left of the midpoint, if there's a midpoint there is a midpoint along the spectrum, and the struggle is, how do we get across the midpoint? Because the midpoint is where things start to change. You suddenly start to see human beings as real sources of value versus just cost of doing business. And you change. It's not just about rhetoric. It's actually saying, we talked about this, but actually we now really understand that if
the implications.
The implications, exactly.
The implications of saying our employees are important.
Yeah, and so if you can get more organizations across the midpoint, it's almost, you can just kind of give them a bit of a push, and they can, the flywheel starts to go, and they can celebrate their own maturity.
They start painting.
They start, yeah, exactly. So it's exactly that. So the challenge is getting fundamentally the boards, the senior C-suite, the senior leadership team into that place where they say, we've got to be beyond that midpoint. Once we're beyond that, then everything starts to work.
Yeah, what I find encouraging is that you guys are doing so much work in the investment world, because if also the motivations and incentives of the shareholders not move away from the financial return on investment, but there are other value drivers added on the fact that the company has to be financially sustainable and there needs to be a return on investment for shareholders. That, to me, is a very promising and hopeful fact.
Yeah, and back in 2014, when we started this journey, we decided it would be too hard a challenge to go direct to boards and C-suites and say, we want to help you build a mature organization. But we felt and believed, and that was our original strategy, was that if we convinced investors that investing in organizations that were either mature or that were on the journey or were on the transition towards maturity are the kind of firms that they should be investing in, and that if they weren't investing in those kind of firms, actually they would be carrying very serious risk. So, risk of collapse, of a corporate entity. And what's really interesting is if you look at a lot of the corporate failures in the last, even, in the last decade, those corporate failures are, what we would say would be a significant lack of maturity. It's human beings which are the causal drivers of the failure. And it's a failure to understand that risk as much as the fact that if you're not doing the right things in terms of your people and your human system, then that risk is material. So these are the kind of things when you present it to an investment world, that's when investors really kind of wake up.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a very simple example, and I'll give you the name of the firm because we've had a lot of engagement with the firm. I stood up publicly in 2015 and in front of 100+ investment firms, and we had rated the maturity of Nestle. And it was described at the time by the chair of the session in the London Stock Exchange, hey, Stuart's just rated Nestle at 2 notches below junk. And everybody in the audience understood what that meant, because they understood a credit rating 2 notches below junk was not a good place. And what was really interesting for me was that the investment firm that sat alongside me had a big stake in Nestle, and they said, we agree with everything you say. And what we were saying was that they were missing huge amounts of financial value. They were missing huge amounts off their operating margin. Actually, if you look at Nestle since then, they've had a lot of issues and challenges. They're still around, and they still have challenges today from a financial and a societal standpoint. They're still trying to navigate how to take a lot of their product base, which they admit themselves is not healthy, and make it fit for purpose in a world which is increasingly demanding sustainable products, environmentally, healthily, and in human terms. So I'm not going to comment on where Nestle is today, but that's a good example of how we captured the attention of the investment community back then, and we've done quite a lot of work with them since. So I think having said that, there's still an enormous amount of work to do, not least for the investment firms themselves. They're far from fit for purpose. They still reward and progress people based on short-term financial goals themselves. So in a sense, there are structural and systemic and cultural problems that need to be fixed inside that particular industry sector. But there are a lot of fund managers, there are a lot of investment firms that are not just taking this seriously, are not just talking about this, but they're integrating these factors into their investment models. And they're integrating them into the way they engage with companies as well. So it's another, to your point, it's a really, really strong driver of change, which is where we always started from. If one of your top 10 institutional investors is coming to you and saying, we think you can improve in X, Y, Z, and we'd like to see that improvement, then you listen to those people.
Very cool. And also cool that by the end, although we're nearly at the end of the conversation, that we also pointed out the risk aspect. In the beginning, we were focusing on the fact that investing in becoming a mature organization creates a lot of value. But I'm glad that we also pointed out that not investing in becoming a more mature organization comes with significant risks. And often the fear for pain is a much stronger driver for change than the prospect of pleasure. So I'm
Yeah.
glad that we pointed that out as well in this
Yeah,
conversation.
and I don't think we can understate the importance of that in terms of getting people's attention. It's often difficult to sell the upside in value terms because a lot of people just don't buy it. Well, yeah, I hear it kind of makes sense, blah blah blah, but it's a nice to have, and yeah, we can make money by lowering our prices, or investing in this data. So there's always other you can, but as soon as you say, hey, actually you could be you're likely to be carrying significant material risk, and if you don't understand that, assess it, and mitigate it, then at some point you could have a real problem. And I'll give you another example. There's a fashion house in the UK that has actually been invested in by seemingly progressive investors who were caught with really bad working environments for people that made garments in the UK, not in Myanmar or other parts of Asia where this kind of thing has been more prevalent, is likely to be more prevalent, I guess. But in the heart of the UK, we have people with really, really atrocious working conditions, paid really badly. And this was found out. The firm said that they would fix it. They would invest in all these things that would make a difference. And then in the last 6 months, the BBC have done an undercover investigation and found that a lot, to a very significant degree, that's been rhetoric and not reality. So they've literally been doing the same thing. Now, if you look at the share price of that organization over that 3-year period, it's been going down. Now about 10% of what it was worth at the start of the scandal. So that's what we mean by, if you're not investing in maturity or investing in the human organization, particularly in these management systems and cultures, this kind of risk manifests and is really real. So you could put a hole in the value of your organization, which continues to leak over a very, very long period of time.
Okay, great example to wrap up the conversation. I think the participants of the session next month will be super energized after they heard your introduction, and also the listeners who won't be there but who just listened to your story and your experience and your approach and your examples. I'm sure we created some awareness on the need for more mature organizations in the world. So super thank you, Stuart, for your time, and looking forward to next month.
Great. Looking forward to it. Thank you very much, Lee.